Hello, Waze community. Thank you for joining us for another exciting edition of Waze Community's Office Hours. I am your host, Brett, and joining us today is one of the newest product managers for the WME team, Alona Schatz.
Hello, nice to meet you.
So,
thank you for having me, Brett.
Absolute pleasure. We're so happy to have you, especially for one of your first presentations to the whole community at large. Today, Alona is going to be sharing with us what is coming up next for permanent hazards. So, without further ado, Alona, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Brett. Let's get started. So, hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. My name is Alona. I wanted to get to know everybody a little bit today before jumping into our pretty full agenda. I want to talk about permanent hazards, one of the most long-awaited, kind of biggest features that we're working on that includes many phases. Today, we'll be talking about the vision, the challenges, what's already been released, and what is coming up next. So let's get started. Before we do, actually, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I've met some of you in the virtual Caribbean meetup a couple months back, but for most of us, this is our first time meeting. So hi, I joined as a PM here at Waze in November. I joined Gil and Talia in Yaron's team. My background is in urban planning and in GIS, so I'm really familiar with the kind of mapping challenges and the opportunities that we have at WME. Here is my life in 4 images. I worked for Mobileye and the automotive industry, so I'm really familiar with kind of what's going on with cars and navigation and the challenges that this industry is facing today. As I mentioned, I studied mapping, and this is my little family. My husband and my kid, we live together in Tel Aviv. So let's get back to permanent hazards.
Oh, before we jump in, Donnie, can you put the link in chat to ask questions?
I placed it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Sorry, go right ahead.
Great. So permanent hazards, I'm sure you'll have many questions. I hope to answer some of them at least. So permanent hazards are a major goal that we've been working on for a long time now, where the goal is to enhance the map with the kind of road insights and knowledge that only our community has. It's hyper-local information that is super accurate and relevant for driving. It's not just a feature, it's a whole infrastructure, so we can add easily more information to the map, more information to Waze. Our goal at Waze is to become the world's best driving companion. This means giving amazing routing, of course, the most accurate ETAs, naturally, but it means more than that. It means giving our drivers the feeling that they're driving with a local person who knows the road, who knows the dangers or all of the little shortcuts that can be found. We want to be the best driving companion, and we can't do it without our community, without the kind of, again, hyper-local human knowledge that we need from you guys. So permanent hazards allow us to map more, to simply add more layers to the map. That means adding road insights with a longer lifespan. Today, road insights that are already mapped are mapped by drivers, and they're usually things that are very short-lived, like accidents. With permanent hazards, the phases that were already released, we want to add a layer of knowledge about the geography of the road that isn't short-lived, that is long-lasting. It's a permanent hazard, like dangerous intersection. So it's things we know about the road that are long-lasting. We also want to add more map objects. So like cameras, with permanent hazards, we can easily scale up and add more and more objects to the map. Of course, with adding so much new information to the map comes a really big challenge. That challenge being surfacing only what's important. We mentioned that at Waze we want to become the world's best driving companion. Actually, in Israel, when you study to become a new driver, you have to drive with a driving companion. Did you have this?
I learned how to drive in the United States.
Okay. so in Israel, when you first get your license, you need to drive with a driving companion, usually a parent who's willing to risk their life temporarily. in order to actually learn how to drive, because they understand that learning how to drive is never going to be, and having Waze is never going to be the same as having a driving companion right there by your side. That driving companion for me happened to be my dad, and driving with him, knowledgeable and responsible as he was a terrifying experience because everything was dangerous. Look out, it's raining. Look out, there's a car. Look out, there's another car. Obviously, there's another car. This is a road. So we want to be a driving companion in the sense that we want to give our drivers reassurance that we know what's happening, we know what's important, we know what's dangerous, but we're not alerting them about every single thing to the point where they just tune us out. So with permanent hazard, with adding all of this new information to the map, we have this challenge of surfacing only what's important, only what's actually critical to the driver in that moment, and only what they don't already know. So we've actually posted this question a while back to the community, and we got some really helpful input about how we can make this distinction between what we know and what the driver needs to know. So I want to go through some of the community input and how we've integrated it into the Waze app already. So when we're looking at permanent hazards, obviously one of the biggest things we want to avoid is map clutter. We don't want to show too many pins, too much visual noise on the map. This was really strong feedback that we got from the community. What we did in the app, consequently, was to only show permanent hazards in driving mode and only show them when they are on your route. So again, trying to filter out from everything that we know to what the driver needs to know. So this was the first piece of feedback that we got from the community and integrated. Some other pieces of feedback that we got were to only show permanent hazards every once in a while. So they don't need to see it every single drive. If you think back to my dad telling me about that dangerous bend in the road right outside our house, which we see every single time, that's usually not going to be very effective. So we've introduced familiarity capping, basically saying if you've seen this alert an X amount of times, you probably don't need to see it again for X amount of days. So you're familiar with this road, you're familiar with this alert, we don't need to keep reminding you about it every single time. We're also we want to allow drivers, as you've mentioned, to set the settings for themselves, to decide for themselves what they would want to be alerted about and what they actually are okay with. Maybe I'm a very careful driver around intersections and I don't need to be alerted about them because I'm paying extra attention every time. Finally, as you know, we wanted to find very meaningful names for our permanent hazards. So with the help of the community, with your input, we've come to the names that you see now, both on WME and on the map. So sharp curves, complex intersection, multiple lanes merging. It was a challenge to find this naming that could be meaningful, so not just intersection, but that would also be describing what this hazard actually is. So to recap, permanent hazards adding a whole new scope of information to the map. Our biggest challenge is attention, grabbing our driver's attention at the right moment and grabbing it only when we really need it. On the map side, we rely on the community, your guidelines, your hyperlocal knowledge of mapping only when it makes sense, and of limiting the certain kinds of hazards to the countries where they're actually relevant. On the client side, on the app side, we try to group the alerts so we're not exhausting the driver's attention. We use familiarity capping, so we're not saying the same thing over and over again. We cap per drive, so again, we're not missing the driver's attention, and we allow some configuration per driver. So this is all of the infrastructure that we've laid down in order to add more permanent hazards. So let's get into it. What have we rolled out so far? So the first phase of permanent hazards, phase 1 and 1.5, The people who worked on them, I want to shout them out, are Gil Disatnik, and the UX was done by our very own Yuri Tasho. You're all familiar with this phase already. It's all of the point on map features. This is the message that all of our drivers got to know that Waze is now mapping curves, intersections, and dangerous permanent hazards. What it looks like on WME, and I hope this is not news to anybody. This is what it looks like on WME. I'm really excited to share that together we've mapped over 80,000 permanent hazards. So
impressive.
Kudos to everybody. That's a very impressive number. And again, they're all based on your hyperlocal and personal knowledge of the area. And I know it's been hard work, and incredible edits on everybody's side. It's 80,000 permanent hazards is incredible contribution. So we should be very proud. This is what it looks like on the map naturally. So we have the point permanent hazard that is snapped to a segment. That's all great, but what's really exciting is, of course, the future. So what's coming up next? Camera types. We're adding more camera types. I'm really excited to share that we are working on adding more camera types to the Waze map. This is a project that I'm with Judith, our incredible UX designer, and we're really, really excited to share a couple of next slides where we're going to show kind of our thought process and what has brought us here. Okay, so as you know, Waze already maps cameras naturally. This is one of the most, I would say, important and well-loved features in the Waze app. I know some people use Waze only for the speed cameras, so don't know if that's the best use case, but it's definitely a very, very important feature in the Waze app, and one that has been actually with Waze from the beginning. So I think it's long overdue for a refresh. What we want to do with adding cameras to the permanent hazard infrastructure is a couple of things. First off, we want to map cameras in a more exact way. So today in WME, have you tried to map a camera?
Yeah, I have actually, as part of Project Eagle, when we were learning how to map in WME with mentors from the community.
Incredible. And you've noticed that it kind of doesn't work like anything else on WME, right? So it's a point, it's floating in space, you kind of twirl it around. And at least for me, it wasn't clear when I place a camera, what segment it
or even which
in.
direction, really, like especially at a complicated intersection.
For sure. So that's one of the things that we want to solve. Permanent hazards are more clear in that sense, where you just place a point on a segment and it's very clear where that point is effective, where it applies, where we should notify the driver about this. So cameras will work in the same way. You will place a camera on a segment. This not only will create easier matching between how we map and what we show the driver, but it will also allow us to inherit information from the segment. So segment attributes, now that the cameras will be directly on a segment, will be really easy to get. Everything that we already know about a segment, like its speed limit, its name, other restrictions, will be natively, automatically flowing from the segment attributes. It's also going to be much easier to add a segment direction, and it's in general just going to be more related to how they're actually surfaced. So in making cameras permanent hazards, where I hopefully make a better mapping experience, but also we're going to make it more scalable and more flexible. So we're using this existing infrastructure as opposed to the existing cameras, which were based on quite old infrastructure. This new permanent hazard infrastructure allows us to very easily add more and more types of cameras and making it configurable per country.
Amazing. It's actually music to the community's ears.
I'm really glad. I'm really excited to share this. How will it work? So it's going to work just like any other permanent hazard. It's going to be snapped to a segment. We'll have a driving direction and a location on the segment. We're going to keep the separate configuration of lock level because I know cameras are a little bit different than other permanent hazards. So this was a community ask and we've listened to it. It's worth mentioning that we're deprecating the old UI for cameras. And we're going to talk a little bit about the conversion and how we're going to take existing cameras and convert them into permanent hazards.
Exciting.
So let's get into the really exciting part, which is what are the new types that we're finally going to be able to map. As you know, today the supported types for cameras are speed cameras, red light cameras, and dummy or fake cameras. What we want to add is, can I get a drum roll? We want to add at least this many types. Of course, this is going to be configurable per country, so you'll only see the types that are relevant in your country. We put out a survey quite a while ago to the community, and we asked you guys for your input on what kind of cameras they have in your area. There's actually a big variety about this around the world, but what we've seen all over is that cameras have come a long way since speed cameras, actually. So what are some of the types that we want to support? Driving behavior enforcement. This is a major one. There's a ton of different kinds of cameras all over the world where the goal is to enforce good driving behavior. This is exactly the kind of thing that, as the world's best driving companion, we want to let our drivers know about. So seat belts, phone usage, littering, stop signs, noise. This is a new one. So
interesting.
In some places you're not, I think in New York and actually in Israel as well, it enforces honking. So that's pretty cool. And distance between vehicles, and I can't see the last one. Sorry. And turn restrictions. Actually, today I heard about a new kind of driving enforcement camera that I didn't hear about before, but we might add it if we get the feedback from you that it's relevant, which is helmet enforcement.
Very interesting.
So at some stoplights, it catches motorcyclists who are not wearing a helmet and it won't turn green until they do.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Yeah. Very interesting. So let us know if this is a real thing and if this is applicable in your country. So one bucket of new kinds of cameras that we want to support is driving behavior. The next bucket of new kinds of cameras are everything that have to do with the restrictions. So either lane and segment restrictions or area restrictions. What we've seen is carpool, HOV, bus lane, transit, and the area restrictions, so low emission zones, historical center. I'm really excited about the public transport one because in Tel Aviv, they have these cameras and it has cost me money. So I will be very happy to have this knowledge accessible to me.
Here's a kind of cool comment here from Luis that I'm Colombian, and there are some for those where you don't pay their taxes or insurance. So I guess it's catching the license plate, and if you haven't paid your taxes or insurance on your vehicle, it'll catch you on the road.
Yeah,
wow.
I've heard about it. I thank you for that comment. Yes, there is a kind of camera that is about license plate, that is a license plate reader. We kind of went back and forth about whether or not we should map this one, and I would love to see the community feedback about it.
Sure.
Because we want to make sure that we're mapping things that can actually impact driving. So these are all of the new kinds that we want to map. Please let us know if there are other ones. I've heard from the UK community that there's junction box cameras as well, and we might add those, but let us know. I'm happy to see some of the comments here. That's a lot more camera types.
We have those two exactly, like you just mentioned, the ANPR cameras in the UK.
What are ANPR?
I think that's the junction box camera that you were referring to.
Okay, Chris, if you could let us know what ANPR cameras, that would be great. We're really, really open to hearing about new kinds of cameras. We want to make this, again, scalable.
Oh, here we go. Automatic number plate reader.
Automatic number plates. Yes. So this is one that was a little tricky, and we went back and forth about whether or not it should be mapped. I'd love to hear your input as well, and we can take it up with surfacing and what they think about that as well.
Happily.
It is a lot of kinds of cameras. It's all based on the infrastructure work that was laid out with permanent hazards, and it does allow us a lot of flexibility and scalability. But if you think this was a lot, get ready for the next slide. Can I get another drum roll, please? We're doing combinations. So we realized that, again, based on your feedback, based on your input, that many of these new kinds of cameras are actually combinations. So we're allowing any combination of any kinds of cameras for up to 5 types. I know that one of the most long-awaited requests from the community has been speed combined with red light. You can do that now. Some of the newer kinds of cameras are things that like seatbelt and mobile phone and littering, things that look at a lot of driving enforcement altogether. You can do that now. Speed and stop, etc. So these are just a few examples, but we're allowing total flexibility in doing combinations of types of cameras.
Amazing.
Amazing, right?
I mean, I think especially for our community and like the Waze ethos, being able to do this sort of mix and matching to really create the same conditions that are on the road is like the lifeblood of Waze. It's really what we're all about.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm really glad that in this sense, we don't have to compromise about what we map. I will say the big challenge here, again, we're going back to the challenge of surfacing only what is important. When you have a camera that looks at seatbelt and phone and littering and noise and distance, that's a mouthful to tell a driver while they're driving. Be alerted. It's a seatbelt, mobile phone, littering camera. So there will be some hierarchy logic employed on the surfacing app side of things, where they will do the picking and choosing of what are the most critical types at every moment for the driver. But other than that, we think that we're trying to lay down, again, a good infrastructure here, so we're really set up to map the world, to map the parts of the world that our drivers care about and that we want to let our drivers know about. Okay, since we are moving from the way cameras were mapped so far to permanent hazards, there will be a conversion. Of course, we're talking here about cameras, but as you know, railroad crossings have been mapped as kind of camera for obvious reasons.
It's like a hybrid pin, sort of, using the same mechanics.
Yes, so they were based on kind of the same infrastructure, which worked pretty well so far, but we do think it's time to take it to the next level and convert everything into permanent hazard. This means that all of the cameras and railroad crossings that are currently on the map will automatically be converted from floating points somewhere on the map to a permanent hazard pin placed on a segment. So we had a discussion with the community about how you map today and how we should make this conversion. The general guidelines are we're going to map one camera to one segment and one direction. So we're mimicking the way that existing cameras are on the map. One camera, one segment, one direction. A camera will be mapped to the nearest segment that is in the direction it is pointing. And just to be sure, we'll output a spreadsheet with all of the converted objects so we can verify that the migration went well and that we didn't lose anything along the way. So this will be relevant for both cameras and railroad crossings. And we ask for your patience and perseverance while we make this transition.
Here's an interesting question on this conversion.
Mm-hmm.
Steven's asking, will updates to the map be instant like closures or need a tile refresh to surface for users?
About permanent
So I guess
hazards.
that's like when you're adding a new one then to the map.
That's a good question. It should work like permanent hazards work today. I am not entirely sure. Do permanent hazards wait for a tile build?
I'm not sure, but that's something that we can check on and answer later. But good question, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen. It should work like other permanent hazards today. Any other questions?
No, but just from the chat, so we can just keep going.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so Judith, are you here? Judith will be presenting the next 2 slides about the UX. Yeah, if she's here.
No, I didn't know about that.
Okay,
so that's new to me.
Okay. So let me run through quickly the UX flow. Judith is our UX designer. She worked on these, so I just want to give her a shout out and all the credit for making this design very smooth and beautiful and useful. So what we're seeing here, you might notice that there's a bit of a change to the WME interface that you're used to. We're looking here at, you might have noticed the menu kind of migrated to the left. This is something called unified action areas, which I'm sure you'll hear about more as it comes closer to launch. Basically,
we have Judy now, actually.
Okay,
so let's
great.
just bring her up and she'll do it.
Hey,
ahead, surprise guest Judy.
Hi.
I didn't know you were joining us. I'm so happy to see you.
Yeah, Alona, you're doing amazing. I'm happy to be here. I'll just talk really quickly about the UX changes here. So we're very exciting to have new camera types, and thank you for mapping and adding, as Alona mentioned, 80,000 K permanent hazard. So here we're introducing the new UX for camera types. So it will be part of Unify Action Area, which basically we moved all our CTAs to the left panel. This will be also soon available in beta. And you can see the menu is under hazard. You can see we have a drop-down, first level drop-down with camera. And we have those camera separated per types. So we have the old cameras at the top menu, and also like restricted cameras, and as Alona said, driving behaviors one. The menu is still work in progress, so we might have changes here, but this is the general idea, and of course the icons. Thanks.
Amazing. Thanks, Judy. I don't know if you wanted to, on this one as well, for the next slide, did you want to talk about the type selector?
Yeah, I think there was one before.
So you're here,
New
and
camera.
then we came to cameras, and then type selector.
Okay. So as Alona mentioned, we'll have like a cool combinations of cameras, so you can use the autocomplete here and like just pick up multiple types of cameras. And maybe as a later phase, we might also have an indication on the map, but not for this version.
We also have multiple types here as well for the UX, if you wanted to talk about that. I know Alona already presented it in theory, but this is what it's going to look like.
Yeah, so here is an example of like a mixture of a speed and a bus lane together, and then you can apply the direction for this camera. And as an entity, it will be one camera, of course. We're not mapping two separate ones.
Amazing. Cool.
Thank you.
So next up, we have what's next. Judy, thank you for joining us. Such a lovely surprise to see you. You're always welcome back.
You. Thanks, Judy. Okay, so that was all about cameras. And now let's get into the last phase of permanent hazards that we have planned for now. This phase is school zones and scheduler. We have kind of two components here. And the UX designers who worked on this phase were Shai Yanofsky and Nadav Batzil. So shout out to them. Let's get started with school zones. So school zones, kind of a straightforward feature, I think. It's a time-based polygon permanent hazard. Time-based, they will have a schedule to them because, as we know, school zones are active during school hours. And they're going to be a polygon. So similar to maybe restricted areas today, a polygon that encompasses a couple of segments that lives separately from this segment. So you can change maybe the segments under it, and it remains intact. Essentially, for school zones, the goal will be to have an alert to the driver when entering the zone, and optionally, if it's relevant, to have the reduced speed limit.
So speaking of speed limits,
Mhm.
let's pause and take a look at Gregory's question. Is the speed taken from the segment for the camera? So like, for example, like we're going to be able to pull that speed data that's native on the segment and then display it to drivers?
Yeah, the goal with making, I think one of the goals with making cameras permanent hazards and putting them on the segment is that they'll take the speed limit directly from the segment, so that when things change, you only need to change them in one place, and we're not keeping kind of do-over presentation of the same attribute. You don't save it as an attribute of the segment and as an attribute of the camera.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Moving on.
When it comes to school zones as well, the goal would be to have the speed limit of the segment, but then when the schedule is active, to pull the speed limit from the area, from the school zone, and not from the segment.
Excellent.
Scheduler. Scheduler is kind of a big one.
It's, I think, really the most exciting part of this feature for us and for the community. Absolutely.
I think so too. Scheduler is a big feature. Again, like permanent hazards in general, it's going to serve this one first goal with school zones, but it's really an infrastructure. It's a tool that we hope to use across WME slowly, but over time, we hope to use it in more features. So what is it? What is the scheduler? It's a tool that enables our editors to control at what time data should be available to the driver. Data such as time-based hazards, like school zones. So we already have a bunch of schedulers within WME. Anyone who's mapped a restriction of some kind knows it. Those are fine. Those tools are fine, but we do want to take it to the next level with a couple of changes that will hopefully make mapping these easier for more complex situations and for doing many objects at the same time. So when we wanted to create scheduler, the goals were to create something that would be reusable, that would fit all kinds of weird schedules from around the world, all kinds of cases. No, really, there are a lot of holidays I was not aware of that from all over the world. Thank you for sharing your feedback. Shai and I worked with a list of all of the different examples that you gave us from around the world, and we kept checking against those to make sure that we're still in touch. And of course, the goal was to have something that can be robust enough to deal with really weird, really complex schedules. When you think about a school zone or a school year, at first glance, it seems kind of obvious. Okay, I'll take like a very generic example. So like September to June, Monday to Friday, 8 to 8:30 for the school zone hours, etc. But then you get into holidays and you get into specific teacher training days, and you get into all of these kind of nooks and crannies of a schedule that when you want to support them, it can get a little more complex than that. So some of the examples that you provided us were every first and third Sunday of January. So places for like road closures, etc. Speed zones that are in effect from dawn till dusk. Change them, and we want to change them in bulk because there are many schools even in one school area. We want to be able to add things like when the Queen died and there was a big public holiday unexpectedly. So there were a lot of examples that we worked with. In the design process, Shai went through all of the different time units, so hours, days, weeks, month. All of the different kind of relations that could be between them, like the first Sunday of repeating the weekdays, and we worked a lot with existing tools like Google Calendar, Apple Calendar to make sure that we're staying in line with what's the industry convention. And we added this applying excluding concept. So you could say something is applying from September until June, except for winter holiday and spring holiday. So you can make this bigger applying schedule and then add excluding timeframes that take away from this big applying schedule. So this all brought us to this complex idea of, again, these layers of time frames. So one long applying time frame where we subtract different holidays. We made this kind of visual to explain it at least to ourselves.
Makes a lot more sense for me, like splayed out than just saying
Yeah.
it, so that I appreciate it.
So the goal was, again, to make something. So let's say I have, 15 schools in my school zone. I can create one reusable schedule that I'll use for all of these schools. And then I can add or take away different days or times for specific schools. So we hope that this tool will be very, very flexible, both in doing weird holidays that have kind of weird repetitions to them, and in doing things in bulk and kind of tweaking it per specific place. So creating once this bigger schedule and then making these little tweaks per object. The design process also includes, of course, we got the feedback from you that sharing a schedule across objects is something really important, and we're definitely including that. So say you could create something like France public holidays and then reuse it in many different forms.
Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Exactly. We're all about that sustainability. I lost the map.
Let me help you.
Thank you.
There we go.
Okay. Some of the feedback that we got from you guys, we shared. This was actually an interesting dilemma, and I think this is a really great example of where the community feedback is crucial, is critical. We had these two options. So what we've seen before is the option that we went with based on your feedback was creating this one longer schedule, like we're seeing in option A here, and then subtracting from it. Whereas the other option that we were thinking about was create, the schedule from September until Christmas, and then create Christmas vacation, and then create a different holiday, create a different schedule after Christmas until the end of the year. And we got the feedback from you guys that you'd prefer it to be one longer schedule and then subtracting from it. I think this is the kind of feedback that you only get from the people who are really using the tool and have been contributing for a long time and are really familiar with the processes, and also are really familiar with how school zones or any other objects are working in their area. So thank you for that. The prototype, this is just a prototype. Shai made it, and Shai is an incredible UX designer, so it looks real, but it's just a prototype. Looks like this. This is what the scheduler will look like. What we're seeing here is that concept of the different time frames. So we have regular school hours, and then you subtract the holidays and you subtract summer vacation. So I feel like we've built this Lego set with a scheduler where you can kind of put it together and take it apart and put it together again in many different ways. And we hope that it's very, very useful in school zones and hopefully beyond.
So speaking of use, I saw an interesting question here in chat from Carrasco82. Will the speed cameras work for drivers in roaming mode, like without an active route in progress? Because a lot of drivers like to just drive with Waze open to get to see the alerts coming at them.
Yeah, this is a great question and one that we've thought about a lot. The goal is that, yes, I know that some of the newer camera types, first off, this was a very big question for the surfacing squad and the surfacing product managers who thought about it long and hard. And we do agree that it should work in roaming mode. So yes, cameras will work in roaming mode.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Should we move on?
Yeah.
Great.
So to recap, it's been a journey. Today we've talked about permanent hazards. And what a wonderful infrastructure they are for adding hyperlocal knowledge to the map and being the best driving companion in the world. Much better than my dad. So the phases that we've already rolled out to WME, we've mapped 80,000 points on the map that tell our drivers about speed bumps, sharp curves, complex intersections, etc. This is an incredible achievement that we really want to celebrate. The next phases
I think you've got some great.
look sensible and pragmatic.
Yeah.
This is for scheduler, I hope.
Yes.
That's wonderful. I'm really glad to hear that. It was really our hope to make something that is very, very useful. So the next phases of permanent hazards that we're looking at are scheduler as it's going to be a big block. And once we have that down, we can release school zones. So it's funny, school zones are kind of a simpler feature in a way because it's a polygon on the map and it's based on the permanent hazard infrastructure. But because they rely on scheduler, which is this big tool, they're going to have to wait a second until we have scheduler down. So scheduler is a work in progress, as are new camera types. And we will update you as soon as they are, moving along.
And I just saw in the chat as well from Brendan, could you also comment on the future of pedestrian crossing? Is that something we're interested in potentially covering for an alert type?
So I'm not familiar with it. I don't know about any.
So like in many jurisdictions, they will have a actual sign posted for pedestrian crossing, and there's this sort of initiative to alert drivers to that so that they don't, run over pedestrians crossing a busy street. So just as another type of road sign permanent hazard that we might want to take up. I know it wasn't included within the first batches, but just something to think about.
Great, thank you.
So also I can answer this one from Mikael on, not on this one, not on RTCs. I wanted to have this one from Stephen on height, width, and weight hazards. Waze will never be covering that due to legal reasons. We do not support trucks or oversized vehicles, so that's not a type of hazard that we are going to be supporting. Before we move to Q&A, let's just take a look at chat really quick and see if there's any other interesting questions. Is it possible to have a shared schedule for a school zone per state?
Yes, absolutely. The goal is to have schedules that are shared across states and countries. That's totally the goal, to have things that are as reusable as possible. You can create a schedule and then apply it to different objects. So one person can just create, again, the Louisiana school days schedule and then reuse it again and again. And not only that, but you can tweak it to your exact county, school zone, or even specific school.
I'm going to take one more from chat, and then we're going to go to our Q&A deck because apparently you all have been submitting a lot of questions. So from McLaren, for the camera type selector, could you give us a copy-paste function for that as well, so that they'll be able to copy and paste the different types of cameras?
Interesting. I will add it as a to the backlog.
Yeah.
And I'll see. I'm not sure if our UX can support it, but that's a good point. If you have many cameras of the same types, we definitely want it to be as easy as possible to do it. Thank you for that.
Alrighty, so let us switch over to our community Q&A. Danit, who's our first question? Who's the first victim? From Giannis. For each permanent hazard, similar to other reports like police or accidents, for example, users should be able to select if they want to show on the map and or alert when driving. Bunching them all together is not sufficient. Can you please introduce this setting?
Yes, I would love to, except it's not in my realm. I totally agree with you. Obviously, we don't want to bunch them all together. It's definitely not efficient and not sufficient. We want to make it a much, much smarter logic of only surfacing the important things, only surfacing things that you're not familiar with, that you asked to see. There's a lot more work to be done. So I want us to bear in mind that on the mapping side, we've only gotten started with permanent hazards, but also on the surfacing side, we've only gotten started on permanent hazards. There's a lot more to do, both in terms of mapping more kinds of information and in having a better kind of surfacing logic and filtering of what we do there. I agree with you that today what we have is not optimal, and I can assure you that this is not the final stage.
All right, next up. Oh, well, this is from me, but it's actually from Silvio. So for traffic limitations, oh, and by the way, I just want to say that Silvio is my Project Eagle mentor, so he's getting this privilege of submitting questions directly to me for this episode. So for traffic limitation zones, users cannot get any alert from pop-ups anymore. So is it in the roadmap to possibly add ZTLs as a permanent hazard, like a school zone, for instance, with the possibility to alert users when approaching the traffic limitation zone areas?
I can't say that it is on the that it's planned for right now, but I agree with you that it makes a lot of sense. I think there's some work to be done with everything that has to do with traffic limitation zones and alert zones in general. By traffic limitation zones, what are they? Could you give me an example of that, just so I'm sure we're talking about the same thing?
Sure. So like the clearest example, like in Italy, will be they have them set up around like the old city areas of Rome, where only specific vehicles are allowed to enter.
Yeah, that makes sense. So like restricted areas and school zones, I agree with you that there's a lot of similarity there. And I think it would make sense possibly in the future to leverage the permanent hazard and scheduler infrastructure and to use that. Let's get school zones down. Let's get that done. Let's get scheduler done. And then I think school zones is a really good point to start. A, because they're not mapped today. So we're missing out on a lot of information and a lot of insights we could be giving our drivers. And B, I think once we use that feature, again, both on the mapping side and on the surfacing side, we'll have that much more knowledge when we go to revamp restricted areas and traffic limitation zones.
So I've seen it now in chat like 10 times, so I am going to bring it up on this issue of the pedestrian crossings, because it is in WME, but it's grayed out. So I don't know if there's like a plan for activating it or why it was grayed out. I don't know if you can comment on that.
I'm actually not familiar with it. I'm not in the details enough to give you an answer, so I prefer not. But can we take it? We
can take it offline, and I'll reach out to Surfacing Squad, and we can follow up on the forum about that one.
Yeah, I just don't want to be.
No, for sure.
I don't want to mislead if I don't have the correct details.
Because here we have you, on YouTube for eternity, so you don't want to say something you can't commit to. Cool. Next question from Marcine. What about displaying average speed on average speed check segments? We are asking for it since a while.
So it's worth mentioning that everything that has to do with cameras, we're not touching average speed cameras for now. Average speed cameras are mapped as an attribute of a segment. They're not mapped as a point on a map. We decided to phase them for now. Again, our goal was to revamp the old infrastructure of cameras and to add more types, and average speed cameras are not in the current phase. About displaying average speed on average speed check segments, do you mean the average speed of the driver or the average speed that you are shooting for? Like the legal average speed or the driver's average speed?
So from my understanding, this is for the driver's average speed. And that is something that, for example, you have cameras on certain highways that are checking. So, to help, I guess, drivers avoid a ticket if their average speed is going over a certain limit.
I totally understand. So I know that today Waze app shows you the abouts of your speed. It's not always perfectly accurate because we're not taking it directly from the vehicle. We're taking it, from your phone, your GPS, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know that we could display the average speed in an exact way, but we can definitely take it up with the Surfacing Squad and see what they think about it.
Sure. All right, next up, we have from Giannis. WME allows snapping permanent hazards to junction nodes, but they only appear for one of the segments that are connected to that node. This is misleading. Anything snapping to a node should apply to all segments, or don't allow snapping to a node. It's up to you.
Okay, so I want to give you a little inside story about this one, okay?
Excellent.
I've been, researching cameras, and I've been pinning cameras to the map over and over again in the same staging intersection, right? I'm not doing anything.
We're not touching prod.
Not
it's okay.
touching map. I don't have permissions to touch prod. I'm only doing it on the same intersection. There's one intersection right outside the Waze Tel Aviv office that has 1 million speed cameras because I've mapped them there just to make sure. I just want to see how it works. So I map them. And I've also noticed what Yanis noticed, which is junction nodes. What did I do? What would be your first course of action when you find a problem with WME?
Well, I mean, for me, it would be to go annoy you at your desk,
Yes.
but that's not what someone else can do.
For me, it would be to go annoy Gil at his desk.
Ah, yes.
So naturally, I went to ask Gil about it. And here's where the story takes two separate paths. I said, this is a bug, cameras and permanent hazards. Permanent hazards, because cameras are not permanent hazards yet. Permanent hazards should not be snapped to a node because, as Yanis has noticed, they don't apply to all segments. They only apply to one segment. I said, this is a bug. I don't think permanent hazards should be snapped to a node. What did Gil say? Let's make a feature out of it. So, Yanis, I agree with you. I do think that this is a bug. I think it's very misleading that permanent hazards are snapped to a node, and I've submitted a bug about it. So you're totally right, and thank you for noticing.
Excellent story. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So next up, what do we have? Wait, the comment. Which one?
No, it's more of a comment.
This is more of a comment, not I see. So from John, the countdown timer after passing the hazard is not necessary. Okay, thanks for noting that, John. Moving on, from Mark, can familiarity capping be applied to railroad crossings as well?
I'm assuming that as a permanent hazard, it's
Be
going
factored
to be,
into the logic.
yes,
Yeah,
like other permanent hazards. But yeah.
Great. Next, from Peter, since permanent hazards are snapped to segments, will we get a history entry in the future at segment level when a PH is added or removed? This would be very helpful in case there was any change in WME at the permanent hazard and until the phase between the map update is complete for supporting users and update requests.
Okay, so you're asking for a note on the segment.
On the history of the segment,
Yeah.
to know what permanent hazards were added or deleted.
I can add that. I didn't think about it. Thank you for that comment, Peter. I will. Is someone writing this down?
Well, the good part is
It's
that
being
we're on
recorded.
YouTube,
Okay,
so we don't
that's
need to write anything
That's
down.
good. No, because these
We
are
just-
such good comments. These are great, excellent comments, and I don't have.
This is why we do this every month. It's a gold mine for you all.
Thank you.
I'm
but
telling you.
You didn't tell
I'm
me to
telling
bring-
everybody. Like.
I didn't bring a pen and paper.
All right. Another from Silvio that he asked me to submit. We also have a vignette issue. In the case, the situation is different, but without adding vignettes, it's not possible to get a destination and routing from Waze. Would it be possible to do something in permanent hazards even for vignettes, or at least to solve the actual issue that's been pending since 2022?
Without adding. Okay, so the point here is that there are areas where you're not allowed to drive if you don't have a pass to drive in them. And if you don't add your passes in the app, you can't drive in them. So would it be possible to do something? I'm assuming this is a legal issue where we don't want people to drive into areas where we're not sure if they are legally allowed to or not.
Don't ask me. That's a
Yes.
question for Fetch.
So this is more. I mean, we know about the roads. We could route you through wherever, but we want you to avoid fines. So if you don't have a pass there, it's going to be problematic to route you through an area where we're not sure if you're allowed to drive or not.
Mhm. Well, that makes sense. And I think this is probably something we can look into more too.
Yeah, for sure.
Next up from Alex, what about multi-hazards? For example, raised crosswalk, speed bump, and pedestrian crossing.
Interesting, like a combination like we do with cameras. It's not something that we have planned today. And I think with like the way that we will cap and surface things, it might be easier to solve it on the surfacing side. So if we see a speed bump and immediately a pedestrian crossing, we might alert you to those two at the same time. But multi-hazards are something we might be able to think about. I didn't realize it was
Can we
a
go
common use case.
Can we go one back to Sylvia's question, because there's some clarifications here.
Okay.
So basically they're saying that it's for freeways
Mhm.
and that the app should say something like a better road is possible if you use this pass.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. That makes sense. I think it's similar to toll roads, basically, where we can tell you if you want to use a toll road, you can go this way. If you don't, then go that way. There is maybe a better solution that we could surface to drivers rather than just not route them through these vignettes. It's something to think about. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Now I hope everyone's satisfied. From George or Jorge. When the phase one was presented, someone mentioned that one of the permanent hazards would be dangerous lane merging. However, the name of this PH was changed to multiple lanes merging in WME. In my opinion, a lane merge isn't necessarily a hazard. Why did you decide to change the name of this permanent hazard?
Yeah.
I think you answered your own question.
First of all, my dad named all of these, so everything multiple is dangerous. That's the real answer. No, but legally, it's the use of the word dangerous is dangerous. So
I think also beyond the legal issue there, we didn't want to freak out drivers. And if you're hearing dangerous, 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 then you're going to think the entire road is dangerous. So we, after the first run of this in beta, we sort of decided that we needed to refactor and change up some of these names to be a little more real, to describe what it is and not always trigger that reactionary danger alert in someone when it might not be necessary. That could actually,
for sure,
make it less safe.
I think it's also, hopefully it gives you more knowledge. Like a lane merging could be dangerous because there is a very fast lane merging with a slower lane, or it could be dangerous because there are multiple lanes merging. It's kind of a different use case. So maybe it's giving you some more insight there. We definitely went back and forth on this naming for quite a while, and yeah, for sure.
All right, from Pablo. Is it possible to modify the settings of notification in Speed Camera in order to add the option to notify always, also when you're driving below the speed limit?
So I kind of knew this question would come. So today, I don't know if you know, but today when you map a speed camera, you can change the speed to 0. And then it's kind of a hack so that obviously the speed limit isn't 0.
But it'll always show because
so it will always show. In my opinion, the logic of when something should be surfaced should be the logic when something should be surfaced. Solving this in this hacky kind of way where we kind of forge the speed limit into 0 in order for it to be notified always to the driver, I think it's kind of hacky. I understand that it worked for a long time. I think there were some infrastructure limitations in the way that we mapped. I don't think this was a good situation. I think it was kind of a default that over time we kind of learned to use and love. But my goal with this new way to map cameras was to make it right. So it will not be possible to modify the settings of notification. If you think this is something that is, if there are cases where you think this is critical, let us know. But in general, because we're putting this in the camera right on the segment, it's going to have so much more context. You're going to know exactly the speed limit that it's on. You're going to know which road you're coming from. We could do something much more complex where we see you're coming off of a highway onto like a quiet residential road, a very likely possibility that you're over the speed limit. So we might always notify on that particular speed limit. We might use the average speed of drivers. There's a lot more we could do rather than hackily change the speed limit in order to always notify drivers.
So time has certainly flown since we're having so much fun, and we have 1 minute left to our time. So let's take our last question for this episode from Elohe. Welcome to Waze, Alona.
Thank you so much.
Are we going to have different alert distances in the app for different hazard types? For example, speed bumps and merging lanes. Any plans to make the distance depend on the road type or the speed? 150 meters is good for speed bumps, while a merging lane, we need 500 meters and now 350 meters.
So that's a great question. Of course, we want to be the best driving companion. The best driving companion will know to tell you ahead of time when you really need to slow down, and maybe just before you enter something where you just need to notice it and not really. So it makes a lot of sense to have these different distances for the different kind of alerts. As I mentioned before, bear in mind permanent hazards are a new thing for mapping and in surfacing. So expect this logic, the hierarchy, the distance, the when we always notify, expect that to become more and more smart and complex as time moves on. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Alona, thank you so much for joining us. This was really fun. I know the community had a lot of fun too, just based on how active the chat was. For all of you out there, if you are in NA and going to the Mega Meetup, I will see you this weekend, along with the lovely Danit and 40 other members of the Waze and Geo staff. And if you're not going to be at the NA Mega Meetup, we still would love to see you at all the local meetups and the mega meetups that are still scheduled for the rest of this year. Back here on Waze Community Office Hours, we'll be back next month on May 19th, and we're going to be talking about our recruitment efforts and what we have planned for you to help grow your community. So with that, from all of us at Waze, we'd like to thank you for joining us once again. Alona, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
And have an amazing week, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.